we live. All right, friends, it's the 20th of June of 2020. And in front of me, I see someone with a hat that says 20 times. So we are living an interesting life, a life of quantum jumps and quantum growth. And we've had some interesting sessions so far. And for today, we are happy to have a very interesting session to round off the day on nutrition. That's probably on everybody's mind right now because nutrition relates to immunity, and we are all reminded on a daily basis how important immunity is, almost as the only defense against whatever life throws you in terms of bacteria and viruses and whatever comes up. The lady who's going to share with us her wisdom and information is Nicci Robertson. And Nicci, apart from meeting you right now, I don't know your background, but I know there must be an interesting story behind what made you develop into the field of nutrition. So as an introduction, we take over, if you can just tell us a bit about your history and then take us into your topic. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there is a history. I started off in media. I started off in television and advertising and publishing. That was my career choice when I finished school. And a couple of years after that, after battling with health, dieting like many people, and watching so many other people really battle with their health, I went back to school and I decided I wanted to get out of the media industry and I wanted to study clinical nutrition. I had a background in something called psychoneuroimmunology, which is mind-body medicine. And I knew we weren't getting the full story because diets don't work, but we keep banging our heads and doing them. And most people are sick and they become dependent on pharmaceuticals. And it didn't make any sense. So I went back and restudied. And yeah, the rest is history. I've been in the field of nutrition and sort of a clinical field for almost 15 years now. Corporate healthcare, executive wellness, wellness coaching. I see private patients, but I've recently developed an online learning system which is accessible to anybody, and it's at a very low cost, and it really debunks the myths about health and about food, which is the most natural thing in the world, is to eat good food, but the message has been slanted by people selling us food, you know, and by pharmaceuticals selling us medicine. They don't want us to be well. They want us to buy their products. So when you have an education and you have knowledge, you can make better choices. And that's really what motivates what I do.
Good. And I know you've just given us the tip of the iceberg. We'll see towards the end, drill deeper. But get us going on the wisdom that you want to share with us.
Great. So I'll play the video. Let me know if it doesn't come through. But then once we're through that, just throw your questions and let's take it from there. See if this works.
In the early 2000s, after working in the media and advertising industry for most of my life, I changed direction and requalified as a clinical nutritionist. The reason for this is because, like many people, I battled with weight and health issues for much of my life, and the information available to most people was and still is not sustainable and doesn't enable permanent behavior change. Doctors are trained in acute care, which means that they can thankfully fix you when you've had an infection, need to set a bone, or save your life if you've been in an accident. They're not trained to stop you from getting sick in the first place unless they have a personal and particular interest in preventative health care. So I went back to school, and when I had satisfied the criteria needed to qualify, I challenged what I'd learned because people are all different and there is never a one-size-fits-all method.
Okay, it looks like that's bombed itself. So I think that gives you the idea. What I thought we could do today, are you hearing me?
Yes, go ahead.
So yeah, you know, nutrition is such a broad subject, and everybody has their own health journey. Everybody has their own questions. Everybody has their own concerns. I bet out of everybody watching today, I'd say about 6 or even 7 out of 10 of everybody watching is on some kind of pharmaceutical medication, which we've been told that we need to be on for life, whether it's diabetes or hypertension. And most of these things can be cured or avoided with the foods we eat. And food is medicine. What we eat becomes our cells. We told that once you get to a certain age, you can expect to get ill. And we've seen this really come to the forefront with COVID. It's been quite an eye-opener that everything that I talk about, what I've been talking about on the radio and TV and through our courses for years, is preventative healthcare. And we've seen it come into the spotlight over the last, say, 9 weeks, like never before. People with what they call comorbidities, which is your diabetes and heart disease, are more susceptible to getting ill. And we all knew this, but now it's become a really hot topic. So people are growing gardens, mostly because they had no other choice, they were bored, but they're also realizing that their health is in their own hands. And if we take some simple steps and some action points, you can not only prolong your life, but you can prolong the quality of your life. And I think that's actually something that's more important, is that to have a quality of life is the key, not just living until you're 90, but being dependent on other people and on pharmaceuticals. So I think also the confusion comes in is we're not anti-medicine. This is not about saying food is good, doctors are bad, none of that. There's a place for medicine, there's a place for pharmaceuticals, but in this day and age, we've become so dependent on the supermarket feeding us and the doctor putting us back together. And that's not the way to live. So what I did was back in, I'd say it was the mid-2000s, after I'd relearned, a lot of that information that I learned about clinical nutrition didn't make sense to me, because again, it goes back to dieting, which, as we know, doesn't work. So I challenged that and came up with a protocol, which is called the nutrition prescription, which teaches people how to cook. And I think most of us don't eat well because we don't make exciting food. And if our food was delicious and it was healthy and included everything, I don't believe in leaving out fats or carbohydrates or any of those, we need all of these things, then we'll be satisfied with the foods we eat. So if you think back 50 years, very few people were diabetic. In fact, diabetes wasn't even on, it was rare. Heart disease was rare as well, but we were eating real food. We were sitting down as a family. We were eating actual food. No one worried about eggs or butter, but then seed oils didn't exist. You know, a lot of these things came up post-World War II because there was nothing else. Vegetable oils and seed oils were created as a byproduct of a chemical manufacturer, and they sold well. Takeouts were rare 50, 60 years ago. You didn't have a McDonald's, not in this country anyway, but people were healthier. And we had less stress given that as well. So that's also a big factor. And people slept well. So when we look at health, it's not just about the eating. It's about how we balance our lives, the amount of movement we get. It's about our sleep quality. And much of that is neglected, which is what leads to premature aging. It's probably one of the best ways of describing it. And what they call diseases of lifestyle, which are all avoidable. So if I had to tell you that you could avoid heart disease and you could avoid diabetes and you could avoid dementia and you can avoid osteoporosis simply by making a better choice to what you put in your mouth at dinner, most of us would go, yeah, I'd like to do that. But finding the time and finding the resources and planning and preparing is a challenge for a lot of people. So that's what the nutrition prescription is really about. It's getting all of these pieces that challenge us, that are not convenient, and remapping them into a way that is. So I'd say it was about 5 years ago, I attended a functional medicine conference, and there was a very interesting speaker who said, how big is your classroom? And that really, it stuck in my head, because how can you change the world or help people one person at a time? And the truth is, you can't. You can do corporate healthcare, and I've worked in many organizations, from Sasol to Nestle, working with hundreds and hundreds of individuals from executive level all the way down to factory floor workers with great success, because they, especially our factory floor workers, take this information and distribute it into their communities and teach people people who have no medical care, how to look after themselves. So with technology, I was able to create an online program called the Nutrition Prescription as well. And it's a series of modules where anybody with even a rudimentary phone can log in and get all the information that they need to make better choices. And last year I was approached by a company wanting a similar program created for people who have TB. So how to prevent or manage TB, how to prevent or manage HIV, or if you do have these diseases, how to ensure that your immune system is really strong. And now we're seeing, if we had managed to get all of those out in time, it would have made a big difference, because those principles apply to COVID, apply to diabetes, apply to almost everything out there. And the information is there. It's not difficult to apply, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. That's the other problem, is we think making healthy choices is expensive, and it's really not. What's expensive is eating takeout. The margins that restaurants and food manufacturers put onto prepared food is what's expensive. So when you start understanding the basics of what we as a species are supposed to eat and get our heads around how actually very easy it is to prepare it, your life changes. And it's very rewarding from my point of view, but to get it out there en masse is an incredible opportunity. Are there questions?
I think we will have lots of questions as you go on. I just want to know, is that your introduction, and is it now time for questions, or is this just a
yes, yeah,
rhetorical question because you want to carry on?
Yeah. Okay, no, you can carry on. Let's go with questions if there are any.
All right. At this stage, any questions for Nicci? I'm sure she has lots to carry on.
I've got a question. Thanks very much, Nicci. My question is the myth, and this comes up all the time, around healthy eating and what you're advocating for as being more expensive. So implying that if people are poor, they're not able to eat healthy, they almost like forced to eat junk food and basically rubbish. What's your response to that?
Yeah, so yes, I mean, that is the tragedy as well. If we look at what healthy food really is, in my opinion, healthy food is organ meats. So your giblets that you'd find in chicken, for example, kidneys, livers, hearts, those are foods that are full of iron and protein. They're full of amino acids and all the things that make your brain healthy. And those cost very little. We all know that we should be eating oily fish, for example. Very few people in this country can afford salmon. That's not just the only oily fish there is. Pilchards and sardines and those inexpensive oily fish are probably better than the expensive salmon that we've all been taught is your better form of omega-3. So our very, very basic, inexpensive foods, and they can even be organic, it doesn't actually cost more, are the ones that if you know that those are better and you know how to cook and prepare them, you'll make those choices for your family, as opposed to going and getting, you don't have to go eat sirloin or fillet steak to get healthy protein. And that's where the confusion comes in. You don't have to eat those sorts of foods to be, those are not what we call healthy foods. They're not necessarily the healthier foods. So what happens with takeouts and like your KFCs, they do make it cheaper. They make it more enticing. They make it easier to access. So if you're a busy mom holding down a job and you've got 4 children and you have mouths to feed, you're going to want to go and get something that is quick to prepare, going to fill those tummies, and is going to basically shut them up for as long a period of time as possible. But in the end, you're going to end up with kids who are sick, and you're going to end up with a family who's sick. So just understanding that here are some principles. We need protein in our diets. We need oily fish. We need vegetables. These things can be made or bought really cheaply, even at a fraction of the cost of what we would normally go out and eat. And it's also, a good point to say there's good foods and bad foods. And I think that's a problem. There's food. Junk food isn't food, that's junk. There's food. And you know, in our culture, PUP, for example, is a big part. It's an intrinsic part of our culture. To go and say to a group of people, you can't eat that anymore, is ridiculous. Let's rather just focus on what you can get hold of, what you do have access to. It isn't going to cost you a fortune, and build on that rather than say, well, you can't eat white bread and you can't eat PUP because that's bad for you. So the communication around food is very, very distorted. And when people understand, they just need a few things to adjust their diets and make their lives so much easier. You break through that barrier of understanding, and suddenly it becomes accessible to a person to eat healthily. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks very much. Just one last question. What is the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian?
Okay. So that's a great question. So a dietitian, and you know, at the basis of it all, it's the same thing. The difference is in how the degree is worded, for one, and where the curriculum is slanted towards. So a dietitian will be taught to create a diet for a person based on calories, predominantly, and they'll give you a list of foods. They'll create a diet for you. A nutritionist, on the other hand, will be taught what constitutes the macronutrients in foods, how those foods.
Nicci, we've lost you. If you.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So dietetics is very much around a calorie model, right? Where nutrition is how food was grown, how it was sprayed, where it was planted, how it was distributed, and what it's doing for that person, what that person needs at this particular given time. It really depends where you study. It depends on various factors in the degree. Dietetics was very different 20 years ago to how it is now. It depends on who's funding that degree as well. So if there's any corporate funding involved, that's going to very much slant the learning. But in South Africa, dietitians are registered with the Health Professionals Council, nutritionists are not. And there's that's another subject for another day entirely. In this country, nutritionists are seen as veterinary, and the legislation hasn't changed. That said, you can still study as a nutritionist, and you can unofficially practice, but it's the way we think about food and the person at the receiving end of the line of manufacture and creation of that food that differentiates a dietitian from a nutritionist. Dietitians work in hospitals as well, so they create formulas that feed people by tube, that kind of technical thing, where we would be teaching you how to feed yourself.
Thanks, Nicci. I think questions are starting to come in on the chat forum, but I just want to check. Dawn, I think you had your hand up for a comment or a question. Do you want to do it now?
I think do the ones in the chat box first, Jasper.
All right. So I've got from Becky that says, thank you for speaking my language. My question is, which foods are great in vitamin B17? Maybe this could be solution to cancer. So there's probably more than one question in one. How do you want to respond to that?
Okay, so your B vitamins are critical for your health in general. I wouldn't say that B vitamins are part of or going to cure cancer or be part of somebody's road to recovery. Cancer is the body's last attempt at detoxification. That we know. We all have cancer cells that are active in the body, but the body is really good at getting rid of them. So it's when these cells grow out of control that becomes a problem. So understanding firstly that it's a detoxification issue, and one of the enzymes that is required by the liver to effect healthy detoxification requires B vitamins. Mostly your B9 and B12, not so much 17. So you won't get this from food. You can eat as much as you like in food form, but if you don't methylate your B vitamins, which means that you don't break them down and they aren't, you don't create something called folate, there's no hydrofolate in the liver, you're not going to detoxify anything. So it's not just about what you're eating that will give you the vitamin Bs, but are they being broken down and are they being assimilated and are they doing the job? Are the enzymes in place to get them to work? So before you start looking for supplements or asking what foods contain those vitamins, you've got to understand, is that liver working or isn't it? And if it isn't, there's a couple of reasons. One is genetics. So many people have an enzyme that stops them breaking down B vitamins and methylating homocysteine, which is an enzyme that results of an elevation of something called methionine. It's an amino acid called methionine. It's quite a complicated pathway, but it's easy to overcome. So if we know that that's the issue, we would give you something that would help you methylate your Bs, which you'll find in red meat. You will find them in vegetables. You'll find them everywhere. These vitamins and minerals are prolific. But then again, if you're not breaking them down and digesting them in the first place, you're not going to even get near the liver as far as methylation is concerned, or even assimilation of these nutrients. So when you're looking at something as complex as cancer, making sure that those nutrients are in your diet is a good idea, but understanding whether or not you're absorbing them first is the key to getting it right. It's quite a complicated, path of getting it.
I'm sure now that we've touched on the area of health, everybody will have lots of questions on that. The next one is, how do you feel about Banting, or better put, a low-carb diet?
Okay, so there's a lot to be said for low carb. So what is a carb? And this is always the $1 million question. Carbohydrates are abundant in nature. There's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. You need carbohydrates to create glycogen, which is brain energy. You need glycogen to create melatonin, which helps you sleep. So if you're not getting in enough carbohydrates, you're not going to sleep well. And if you're not sleeping well, you're not going to break down fat. You're going to crave sugar. But that aside, what are carbohydrates? So when people say they are on a low carb diet, what they usually mean is that they're not eating bread, they're not eating pasta, and they're not eating flour-based foods, which is good because those are typically highly processed, contain a lot of chemicals. And that's what causes the problem. Everyone says to me, what do you think of Banting? I think the Banting protocol was created specifically for people who are diabetic or insulin resistant. And it works for some people in some instances. It doesn't always work all the time. So if I had a husband and wife client, which I've had many a time, and they're both on a high fat, low processed carbohydrate protocol, it may work for one and not the other because they have a very different biodiversity in their body. They have a different endocrine system. So one may have more insulin production than the other. One might be estrogen dominant, for example. And it's going to work differently for different individuals. To say a low carbohydrate, high fat protocol works for everybody is a mistake. And the other trick is it may work for you now. It may not work for you all the time. And understanding that and being able to see when it's working, when it isn't, and under what conditions is the trick to staying healthy. So if you go on a Banting protocol because you've got diabetes, it's not a bad idea, but you need to understand that when things stop working, every diet works until it stops working. Then you've got to be able to have the knowledge base to see why it isn't working and to change accordingly. I don't believe in leaving out carbohydrates altogether at all. I've never seen it work long term. And most people who think they're leaving out or going on a low carb diet aren't really low carbing at all, because there's carbs in everything. There's carbs in milk. There's carbs in yogurt. There's carbs in chicken. So maybe not to the degree that there would be, say, in a potato, but we're going to get carbs somewhere. But there is a time and place for these things. A ketogenic diet, which is another terminology or another word for low carb, high fat, is very useful in cancer treatment in some people where that cancer is sugar dependent. So it has to be according to that person and what they're needing at this particular time.
All right, that takes care of our questions. I will have some other questions just now. Dawn, come in here with what you wanted to say.
Just want to thank Nicci for her expertise. She walks her talk, and yeah, she's an example of what she does. Just on the multivitamin aspect, I think, that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, everybody's popping these vitamins, but you can overdose on them, can't you?
Vitamins and supplements It depends where they're made. And our bodies are, and the cells in our bodies recognize food. If your supplements are made from food, if they're organic and they're made in a food form, so the body recognizes it as food, your absorption and assimilation is going to be higher than something that is essentially a chemical that the body doesn't recognize and will excrete. It is a big money-making racket. Many of these products don't work. And for the most part, we've got to understand what we're taking and why we're taking it. Supplementation in the long term is expensive. It's not sustainable for many people. You don't know if it's working. So you need to know what you're taking and why, and you need someone to guide you through that. For example, there's a very commonly used vitamin D supplement that I see with many patients. Yet their vitamin D levels are very, very low, regardless of how they're supplementing. That's because it is, I think it's calciferol, is a water-based vitamin D supplement. Now, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. You need fat to assimilate it for it to go into the cells. Okay, so if you're going to take a water-based form, it's not going to go into the cells. It's going to pass straight through you into the toilet. And we see this in the blood work. You can measure someone's baseline vitamin D levels, 6 months later, measure them again after treatment, and there's nothing changed. We put them on a fat-soluble one, inexpensive, but well-made, made in a place that doesn't use sort of a chemical formulation, and you'll see a change. But you'll also see a change to their energy and their mood, and they won't have hair loss, and you'll see a change to their skin health as well. So that's where you know something's working. But you've got to measure. You've got to see what you're dealing with. Again, if a person isn't breaking down and absorbing what you're giving them in supplement form as well, it's also going to end up in the toilet. It's not going to go to where it needs to be. So supplementation is tricky because we think we're just going to take this multivitamin and our bases are covered. It's not the case. Some people have higher needs, some people have lower needs. A lot of supplementations also contraindicate with medication. You've got to be very, very careful. They can be dangerous as well. It's not just a straightforward go to the chemist and get a vitamin. Never works like that.
Thank you, Nicci.
All right, Guy, is your hand up? So yeah, Guy.
Nicci, thank you. I enjoy the subject big time. Being an elderly gentleman who puffs a bit and has a cigar, which I'll obviously, hopefully, won't have to give up for a while. What sort of daily fruit should one have?
Okay. So, Guy, I would want to know what your blood sugar levels are looking like before we even talk about fruit. Fruit is created by nature. Yeah?
Well, okay. I just know my blood pressure is 120/80 or something. But that's, okay. I don't know. So,
fruit was created by nature to keep animals fat so that they survived winter. So that's the whole point of fruit. Fruit is a sugar, okay? Fruit sugar is converted into a triglyceride by the liver, makes cholesterol. This is not a bad thing. Cholesterol is not a bad thing. However, if you have elevated glucose and elevated insulin, fruit is not something you should be having too often. Something once in a while is fine, but to say, I'm doing certain things, what fruits should I be eating to counteract that? It's not going to help you at all. So before saying, have an apple a day, not really. If that apple's sprayed with pesticides and it's been sitting in cold storage for 6 months, it is sugar coated in cellulose. There's no nutrient value in there. And, we've got to be really careful where our food comes from, probably even more careful, worrying about what you're eating is where it came from, how it was planted, and how long it's been sitting around in storage before we worry about whether we should be eating carbs or protein, is how it got to your plates in the first place. Excellent. So yeah, again, there's no short answers when it comes to nutrition. I'm definitely not going to have an
apple. I'm definitely not going to have an apple, but I'll try the other stuff. Thank you very much.
Knowing Guy, he will now supplement apple with apple cider or something.
Yep.
Thank you, Jasper.
All right, Nicci, I've got a question here from Becky, who still says about the first thing on, thanks, you answered my question partly on vitamin B17, but The question is something about a conspiracy theory that that the B17 that's found in avocado and mango pits or stones can treat cancer, but it's hidden by the food and beverage industry. So I know there would always be some conspiracy theories out there. So what's your take on that?
Look, I've never heard of this one. I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories. I wouldn't put it past the pharmaceutical or food industry to hide anything that's going to put them out of business. This is not news. So if you've heard something that you found a way to treat cancer, best thing to do is try it out. You know, I've never really heard anything come up. You know, but I've never gone looking. You know, but human beings don't really eat the avocado stones or mango stones. So, you know, it'd be quite hard to get your hands on that in the first place. But, you know, if there's a way to patent it and if there's a way to put it into a pill, someone's going to do it. But I can't give you much of my personal opinion on that one.
I think you raise an important point. I've been a part of this industry for the last 40 years with a company that's in it for the last 60 years. And they have a very strong philosophy. At one stage, people came up with immune boosting or anti what do you call it, bacterial properties and stuff out of pine bark. And technically, the people who made the claims were correct, but the company made a very strong stand on it to say, listen, if it's not part of the human food chain that was consumed like that for the last hundreds and thousands of years, then there's a reason for it. And I think technically I also don't see myself eating, I eat the avo, but not necessarily the pips. So there's a question there that say, do you know of, and I think that's a question that's on all our minds with this lockdown and being inactive and growing exponentially in bodily weight, are there foods that help speed up or correct metabolism?
Yeah, so food in general will speed up your metabolism. It's being sedentary and standing around for too long that slows the metabolism. So metabolism is a very confusing term. We think it's the rate that we burn calories, and it is to an extent, but it also has a lot to do with your percentage body fat. So if you have more muscle than fat, your resting metabolic rate is going to be higher. If you're not sleeping, if you're bad at sleeping, your resting metabolic rate is going to be a lot lower. So metabolism is about conserving energy in times of crisis, and that's why we exercise. So we push that ability to use up calories and push our ability to use stored fat by exercising. But that's another story as well. So from what I believe, and this is my central hypothesis, is we have something in our systems, all of us, called a nitrogen balance. So this is dietary nitrogen, which is increased by amino acids. So when we eat protein, we increase our systemic nitrogen balance in the body, which turns us into fat burners rather than fat storers. How it does this is we build lean muscle tissue. So when you have more muscle mass, whether you're female or male, muscle is an endocrine organ which downregulates inflammation, it upregulates metabolism. So getting in enough dietary protein is one of the keys to getting, when we talk about metabolism from this point of view, is leaner, stronger, and healthier, which equals anti-inflammatory. When we are not inflamed, we're less susceptible to disease. Then comes the question is what protein? So it's a highly contentious issue. I'll put it out there. I'm not in favor of plant-based protein. I've never in my entire career seen it work to the extent that animal protein does across the board. I have been vegetarian and vegan personally in my early 20s. I was the fattest I've ever been because I didn't eat animal protein. I ate everything else. Your legumes and your beans and your chickpeas are about 12% protein, but they don't contain a full spectrum of amino acids. So if you're using that for dietary protein intake, you're going to be overcarbing by about 3 times more than you should. So there's a lot of fine tuning. It's not to say you can't do this on a plant-based diet. You can. but it's going to take a lot of work to personalize it for an individual, depending on their age, their sleep, their endocrine system, their resting metabolic rate, and their fat metabolism. So it's not just a case of eat meat or don't eat meat. We need to see what's going on with that individual to be in a positive nitrogen balance to increase that metabolism.
Thanks, Nicci. Well, if you have a chance in between all the questions, because I will keep you on the stage there for a while, but if you can also just pop us on the chat forum, where can you be contacted? Where are you based? Because I think a lot of people would like to chat with you offline. All right, I see a mental health that contact and maybe a cell number as well. Another, not a question that comes up, but or it's one of the things that I just wanted to ask you. I think you might, when you said to Guy about his blood sugar, I was thinking of, and these fats come and go, and some of them have a base. But what is your view on eat according to your blood type?
Okay, that's a really interesting one. So that was the theory behind that. Hundreds of years ago, the Africans lived in Africa, and the Europeans lived in Europe, and the Chinese lived in China. And what we see with population groups is a predominant blood type. So not much mix and match of blood types. So we talk about A, B positive, O type. And we saw regions in the world where there was a predominant blood type. Now, because this was hundreds of years ago, thousands, in fact, years ago, before populations intermingled and traveled, there were particular eating styles for those populations. So in China, for example, rice is a staple. It has been for thousands of years. In Japan, fish would have been a staple. So that's genetically, over time and over evolution, what those blood types were associated with. So a hypothesis was born and assumed that because these people with this predominant blood type living in a specific region did well on rice, therefore, with people with those blood types could eat rice. And well, there weren't many chickens in China. So if you have an O blood type, chicken's probably not good for you. It's a theory. The reason this diet works is because any diet works. When you become conscious of what you're eating, irrespective of what you're cutting out or including, you're going to make better choices. So for a period of time, the blood group diet will work for many people. And as long as they stick with conscious eating and cutting out junk food, which the blood type diet teaches you to do, you're going to do well. But like any diet, it's going to fall off eventually because it's not really based in science, let's face it. You know, I know many Chinese people who can't tolerate rice, but they are genetically geared to eat this particular grain going back to their great-great-grandparents. But for them specifically, because of whatever reason, it's not working for them, irrespective of their blood type. So I don't think something so simplistic is ever going to be the answer.
All right. Any questions before I ask another question? Tony, your hand is up. Take over the mic.
Yes, very interesting, Nicci. You are an educationalist, and I just want to make a comment about lack of education in nutrition generally. I work with children and their parents in townships, and their total ignorance about what they should and shouldn't eat is absolutely amazing. None of them seem to realize that putting 7 spoonfuls of sugar in a cup of tea when you're 6 years old is perhaps bad for you, and Coca-Cola is their favorite drink. So they're way behind understanding the many great things you're talking about here. They just need to be educated not to eat these crazy things. And just a comment for Guy while I'm at it. Guy, if you're smoking, then don't waste any money on nutrition. It's total money down the drain.
Hey, definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah, Tony, you know, it's so sad that the people who can least afford medical care are the ones who are drowning their sorrows in sugar, and because they haven't been taught any different. because what happens with sugar, like any drug, it makes you feel good for the moment. And if you're living in poverty and something's going to make you happy for 5 minutes, you're going to do that. Also, it's widely available and it's cheap. So it is my passion to try and get the education out there. I have a school program which we are going to try and get free to children in areas where they can't afford this. There is potentially funding for an online diabetes program that's accessible to kids and anybody who doesn't have the money to come to a nutritionist. We're just trying to find a way through that. Creating the program, creating the educational platforms easy. It's the distribution and getting it out there en masse, which is tricky. So that's the challenge at the moment. But it is so critical to our healthcare systems in the future that people understand that what they're eating is going to kill them if they carry on like that.
Okay, Trevor?
So, Nicci, my question is going to tell you where my nutrition comes from. I can only recall one statement in your whole presentation. Someone said to you, the whole world is a classroom or something to that effect. Can you remember you made that comment? What exactly was it?
How big is your classroom?
How big is your classroom? What did that mean to you? Because I'm making an assumption, but I want to hear from you what that meant.
Yeah, so when I first learned how food can be your greatest tool for health, I wanted to tell everybody because I'd cured myself from fibromyalgia. I'd cured myself from a lifetime of all sorts of uncomfortable diseases that within a couple of weeks were not an issue in my life anymore. And it was cheap, it was simple, and it was almost a no-brainer. It was almost like I was holding on to a secret that I needed to tell everybody. And when he said, how big is your classroom? My driving force is to share the message with as many people as possible. And I qualified as a clinical nutritionist. I see one person at a time. Yes, I have a podcast. Yes, I have social media forums, but that is a very select group of people who can afford to be on those platforms. It's not getting the message out there to the people who need it most. So that's always been my motivation, is how wide and far can we spread this message and hopefully give people the tools to change their lives? Because once they know and know how they feel and have got the education, they can do anything, just like I did and anybody else I've worked with.
And how many people do you now reach? If you can take me back, I think you might have said this was about 3 years ago or something to that effect. When did you first get that message?
No, that was 2 years ago. So when I started in healthcare, aside from private practice, I did a lot of corporate healthcare. So that learning reached thousands of people and they paid it forward into their community. So I remember working with factory staff at Nestle who took what we taught them and they taught their communities and they changed the lives of so many people within their communities. That was the whole point for me. Nowadays on social media, yeah, we've got a couple of 100,000, followers and lots of people download the podcast, but people are still generally sick. And like you say, Tony, there's children out there having 6 teaspoons of sugar and these messages haven't reached them because we're just not getting to them. So even, we've reached a fraction of the amount of people who need to know that they can change their lives just by putting something else in their mouths, and it won't cost them more. It may even cost them less.
So, and if I can just throw a third one in, because I see someone's coming up with a nutrition question there. The reason for my question, Nicci, is that many of us as business folk and all those folk who are coming onto the virtual Trade Fair.africa are wanting to actually crack the secret of how to reach hundreds of thousands of people. And so what do you put that down to? What have these folk got to do to get out there, reach people, and do they do it with a profit motive for each one of those numbers, or do they do it as you've come to us and what I'm interpreting, you want to make a difference in the world?
I don't think you can do one without the other. We've all got to survive. We've all got to be remunerated. There's got to be money to make it happen. So we can't get away from the financial side of things. Only when you become so wealthy, you can become a philanthropist and do it for nothing. But even they don't do it for nothing. So for me, it was through the cellular networks. My nutrition program will hopefully be available via, the mainstream cellular networks in the near future. So how do you get to millions? You've got to start building. It depends on the industry. So I suppose that's also a good place to start. So it depends what you're selling and who your market is and where they are looking. So if you're selling container homes, you know who you're selling them to, and you know where they go looking for these things, who your potential market is. So I think that's basic marketing. You've got to know who you're selling to, and you've got to know where they are so you can catch their attention. The days of billboard marketing, television marketing is on its way out. It's a dying art form, unfortunately. So your social media platforms are your biggest touch points, at least for the moment. And then what I've also found works very well is you've got to give something free. So if I'm selling a course, I'm going to give you lots of free stuff to make sure that, we're all talking the same language to begin with. Everyone wants a deal. They want something for nothing, which is fair enough. You want to know that that person just isn't cold selling you. It isn't hard selling you. So you've got to be able to give as well as take. But it really depends on the industry. In my industry, it's a human connection industry. So I've got a very specific way of targeting people. I do a lot of market research. I want to know what people want to know. So with the podcast, I invite lots of questions, and then I go out and find experts who can answer those questions. So we've got to fill that need. People need to feel on a genuine level that you're talking to them. You're not just throwing a message out there.
Lovely. I'm going to leave you to the nutrition question.
All right, thanks, Trevor, for that question. But coming back to some more detailed technical stuff, and just by the way, you are doing exactly that, Nicci. I think you handle a genetic topic in a way that speaks to everybody personally, and we can certainly give you more of those platforms. We can talk about that afterwards.
Fabulous.
Before I bring up the question, I just have a general thing that I was triggered by Becky's earlier question around cancer. And I think if you look at, like you rightly say, all the so-called big five or the big diseases out there, the hearts and the cancer and the diabetes and the blood sugars and those kind of things, they were not known even 50 or 100 years ago. So something in our foods must have, or lack of foods must have caused it. So my one question is, can you maybe just broadly give us an indication of what lack of foods could create certain things? And then the other thing that one also hear a lot is the higher the acidity level in your body, the more prone you are to then pick up diseases. So those are my two questions, and then I'll go back to the questions from our audience.
So the big difference between the way we eat these days as to how we ate 100 years ago is we're eating a lot more processed foods. So if you go and get a lasagna, for example, from Woolworths, and you look at the ingredients on the back, there are things in there that you wouldn't use in your kitchen to make a lasagna. So it's not the pasta that's the problem, or the meat, or the tomato, or any of those normal ingredients in that lasagna that's causing a problem. It's those other unknown guys that you don't even know how to pronounce that are upsetting the way you digest. It's upsetting the way you assimilate the food you're getting in. It's upsetting the whole system. Most people who live on takeouts, whether it be anything from Nando's through to KFC to McDonald's, will experience some level of discomfort after they've eaten. This is not natural. It's not normal. We've normalized so many things that we shouldn't be normalizing. One really good example is reflux, is heartburn. Heartburn shouldn't be there. You shouldn't have that feeling when you're eating or after you've eaten, because it means that something's wrong, not with you, with the food you've eaten. Something is not digesting or breaking down properly, mostly because it's not even food to begin with. So if you had to go and make homemade bread and eat that, you'd feel fine. But you go and get a piece of white bread from the supermarket that doesn't go stale in 24 hours. Now, bear in mind, if you make bread naturally, like man has been making bread for thousands of years, it'll be toast on day 2. It'll be bird food on day 3. If you go and get a loaf of Albany bread or Woolworths bread or any of these factory-made breads, it'll still be fresh to an extent a week later. So something is in there that is increasing shelf life. That thing that's increasing shelf life and increasing the smell and the touch and the texture is not agreeing with your digestive system. So you get reflux, you go off to a doctor, you get Nexium or what they call a proton pump inhibitor, which lowers your stomach acid. When you start lowering your stomach acid, your natural barrier to protecting you from bacteria on the outside world is inhibited. So there's a place for these things. There's definitely a time and place for proton pump inhibitors, but not long term. And we've got to ask what's causing the problem in the first place, instead of just putting a Band-Aid on something that's never going to get fixed until we figure out why we keep bumping our heads. Okay, Thanks. So that's the first. Does that answer the first question?
That's the first question, yeah.
Okay. Right. Second question is acidity. So it is impossible to be too alkaline or too acidic. You would die. The body will regulate your pH according within millimoles of where you should be. So if you tend towards acidity, so you eat a lot of sugar, you drink a lot of alcohol, your body is going to leach calcium out of your bones to regulate your pH. So to know if you are eating too much or in an acidic environment, you're going to suffer from osteoporosis, you're going to suffer from gout, you're going to have all sorts of aches and pains, which are indicative that your body is using up your calcium supply to get that pH back into balance. It's virtually impossible to be acidic. There are parts of our body that have to be acidic. The gut, for example. If we don't have enough gut acid, we're not going to break down the foods we're eating. Your blood pH can't be too acidic or too alkaline because you'll die instantly. So the regulation of this pH is governed by the system. So yeah, I mean, if somebody says if they're feeling acidic or they know they've got too much acid, I'd like to know how you're experiencing that. We can break down what you're eating and what your experience is symptomatically to go upstream again and figure out what's going on. Yeah, and for many people who eat foods that create too much acid, you're going to feel it in your bones. You're literally going to deplete calcium. So one of the best ways of tackling osteoporosis is to make sure that your sugar, caffeine, and alcohol intake is moderated so you don't deplete those calcium stores.
Thanks. And there's a last question. Gavin has that's not a question. He just makes a comment. If your veggie shop doesn't have insects flying around, there's something wrong with the veggies being sold, because insects don't believe in advertising.
Absolutely.
And then the question for you, Nicci, is from one of our attendants. What foods do you suggest staying away from if you have fibromyalgia?
Okay, fibromyalgia is a systemic inflammatory disease. So most people experience fibromyalgia as pain, crazy headaches, back pain, shoulder pain, creakiness, things that we associate with aging, but it is intense and acute pain, swelling of joints. So there is a generalized inflammatory response in the body that creates the swelling and the pain. So you'll go along to a doctor and they'll give you cortisone, usually, because that just shuts off the communication from the brain to the nerves and brings down the inflammation temporarily, but it also thins tissues. So there's a place and time for cortisone. So foods, generally your inflammatory foods again include alcohol and sugar. Those are your two most inflammatory foods that trigger systemic inflammation in the body. So what I did when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia is I cut out sugar for the most part. And when I say sugar, it's not just white table sugar or chocolates. It is everything that gets digested and broken down into a sugar, which includes flour. It includes almost every processed food out there. So what you've got to do is eat real foods. So if this picture in the background that I've put up on the background there, those are real foods. Those are ingredients. And most of us don't look at that as food. We see that as ingredients. But those ingredients are the foods that switch off inflammation. And you will feel better. And you'll feel better within 10 days. That's the nice, that's the sort of the payback we get, is that the results almost instantaneous. You don't have to wait a long time to start feeling clearer headed, more energetic, less painful than you did 10 days ago. It really works very quickly.
All right, thank you very much. It's amazing again. It's one of those sessions where time just evaporated. And here we come at the end of the day, and Nico was another good choice for the speaker. Yesterday we had a brilliant speaker finishing off the day, and we matched that again today. So thank you very much for that. And
so glad.
Maybe for some of our guys who haven't had a chance to say something, if you're still on, let's quickly hear from you. Just a closing comment. It can be directed to Nicci, or it can be in general. So let's start there with Anna D. Wessels. And after her, it will be Pierre Grobler.
Hi, no, I actually just want to say, Nicci, thank you very much, especially on the fibromyalgia, and just, just reaffirming on how healthy foods actually are and what real foods are and what is seen as takeaways. A lot of times we think that home-based foods is something that we buy and put in our freezer and eat later. And as you mentioned, the fresh fruits are just pure ingredients. So that was really informative. Thank you very much. It was interesting to attend.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
Anna.
Thank you.
Then Pierre, and after him, Donovan.
Thank you, Nicci, for the presentation. It was very, very interesting. I think my son will also be quite, this whole thing, because he's doing chefing and all of that. So he will definitely take that, and that's very, very, very interesting. It's very informative. Thank you very much for that.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre. It looks like Donovan disappeared, so we'll have Trevor Kettler and then Dean.
Nicci, thank you. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And you're probably wondering why my video is not on. So while you were busy talking, I was having a bowl of popcorn. So you don't have to shout at me. But thank you so much. It was excellent.
Pleasure. Let popcorn be the worst. It's not so bad.
All right, we've got Donovan back. Donovan? You must sit close to the mic, Donovan. All right, we can't hear Donovan. Dean, you, and then after you, let's hear from Tony. Dean? All right, I don't think Dean is there. Tony, you?
I think this is one of the most important subjects in the world. It's so sad that so many people never get to hear about it. So Nicci, you're doing fantastic work. Keep it up. Let's educate people. And may they all live longer, and then at a good ripe old age, just drop dead quickly.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony. Let's hear from Guy, and after that, Irene.
Hey, Nicci Smaller. Brilliant, brilliant. I've just gone and had some grapes and strawberries. I decided yesterday I'm going on about a 3-day cheese, grapes, and all that sort of stuff to clean the body, you know. So thank you. I like the Avo in your background.
Now Nicci, don't believe a word Guy says. When he says he's on grapes and strawberry, that's his code word for red wine and strawberry liqueur.
No.
All right, let's hear from Irene, and then after Irene, Dawn.
Nicci, tell me something, vitamin B shots, they work.
So I don't know, I don't know anyone who's had a vitamin B shot who 10 days later go, I feel so great, I've got lots of energy. Why are you having it in the first place? So most of us go for B12 if we're feeling tired, if we're feeling run down, if we're feeling like we need a bit of a boost, which makes sense. But if you're not sleeping and you're not exercising and you're not eating well, it's going to be a bit of a waste of time. I think we all need extra vitamin B, but the body manufactures what is needed from that vitamin B by what we eat. So in my opinion, a bioavailable vitamin B supplement is hands down going to be more efficient in the long term than a vitamin B injection. That said, some people swear by them, and there's a lot to be said for placebo, and who knows, maybe they're needing it. So I think it's a case of, if you find that it really works for you, why stop? If you're having them and this is making no difference, don't carry on. Let's find another way of doing that, of getting you to that end result that you're looking for.
Thanks, Irene. Dawn, and then Donovan or Becky, if you can come on after Dawn.
Thank you, Nicci. Always so informative. So my definition of fast food is fake food, because it doesn't taste like anything. They put in all those tasty things just to make it taste like something. So fast food is fake food. But thank you, Nicci. Just brilliant.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thanks. Becky, are you on? Yes?
Good afternoon. Yes.
We can't hear you. Sit close to the mic, Becky.
Good afternoon once again. Yes. What an amazing topic. And my take is that, we've got a whole range of food that we still need to discover. And, while we are having nutritionists, which really, I appreciate, Nicci's program and actually changing the lives in the community. And I would like to just have a suggestion to say, we need to work more together with the dietitians, just to get, maybe for her to visit the hospitals and just work together with the dietitians, because sometimes the people, they don't know the programs with the nutritionist as well as the dietitians or the in dietetics department. So I guess if everyone can just form as a team to actually come up with a solution, because we are getting these GMOs, we go into the shop, we are getting this nice program, it's well designed, but now we can't put it into practice because someone is saying this, someone is saying this. We know that there are good, well organic supplements, yes, that we are also using. I'm part of one of the, my business is in Neolife. And I know very well that, supplements, they do work, because there's not much vitamins and minerals that you can get from food. So in as much as you can say, we need to eat more food and more food, but now this food, they do have, a lot of toxins that is sprayed around while it's still in the field. So I just need the whole team to just work together, to come up with a program to say, while you are visiting just one or two organizations, and just to come up with a solution for the people, because some of the people, we are really lost, we just eat because we have to eat. Yeah.
Thanks, Becky.
And there's a lot of confusion out there. There's so much conflicting information. It is very confusing. And the thing is, with whether it's dietetics or nutrition, if we're doing this for the greater good, to really just help people, there should be no ego involved. It doesn't matter who's right. We all can agree on the one thing, is that we need to eat real food. That's, I've never known anyone to disagree with. So if we can keep that in mind, that real food first, it's not about selling products. It's not about marketing a Provita, for example, which all dietitians love to put people on, which just gives me the creeps because it's processed food. It's like, let's teach people to eat real food as nature intended, and you're going to solve a lot of problems.
Thanks. And then a word there from Ivan, and then Gavin.
Thanks, Jasper, and Nicci. Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. I could talk for days on the subject with you. I'd love to, but I think the time unfortunately has run out on us today. But very, very important topic, and I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly with with the ideas and the thoughts that you've put across today. And yeah, I wish we just had a lot more time. So, but thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, I put my contact details there. So if anyone needs to, my email address and the website is there. There's a really, really nice podcast that's going out, I think on episode 26. So if you've got any specific questions, we go out there and hunt for the answers. And the podcast goes out every week, sometimes more than once a week. So it's South African based. It's very current to our situation. And yeah, let's just keep talking anytime. I love answering questions.
Thanks, Nicci. Gavin, and then Trevor.
Nothing beats someone who's educated on a subject. Thank you, Nicci.
Thank you.
And Nicci, I was about to say I could eat a horse, but it's probably not the right thing that I should be saying here. But if you can fax that poster to me, that's at the back, I'll eat that as well. You've made me hungrier and hungrier as I've been going along here. So I'm worried about where I'm going to. I think I'll join Guy with a little bit of grape juice and whatever he can fax to me. Nicci, thank you very much. Jasper said it. Quality speakers, ended the day on another high. Just loved it, and all kudos to you and what you're doing.